Hello, my dear friends. Welcome back to Li Tu Na. Thank you for spending this time with me. There is a specific kind of fear that only a mother knows. It is not the fear of physical pain. It is not the fear of illness or getting older. It is the sudden, freezing realization that your body is failing, and the tiny person who relies on you for his very survival is standing right there, looking at you, and you cannot help him. I want to talk to you today about a moment when I felt exactly that. A moment of pure, helpless terror. It happened recently, right during the Lunar New Year. Tet is supposed to be the brightest, warmest time of the year. The air is supposed to be filled with the smell of sweet traditional foods, the sound of laughter, and the feeling of new beginnings. I had so many beautiful plans for Henry. I wanted to dress him in his new clothes. I wanted to see his face light up when he received his red envelopes. I wanted to take him out to see the flowers and give him the perfect, happy childhood memory that he deserves so much. We had been looking forward to it for weeks, but life does not always follow our plans, does it? Sometimes, it brings you to your knees when you least expect it, to remind you of how fragile everything really is. It started as just a small shiver. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was just tired from all the holiday preparations, the cleaning, the cooking, the endless little tasks that mothers do to make everything perfect. Mothers are so incredibly good at lying to themselves, aren't we? We ignore the aches in our bones. We push down the exhaustion. We drink a glass of warm water, take a deep breath, and tell our bodies to keep going, because we believe we have no other choice. There is no sick leave in motherhood. You cannot call in and ask for a day off from being a mom. So I kept going. I forced myself to smile at Henry. I held his little hand. I tried to keep the festive, joyful spirit alive in our home, but the heat inside my body was rising. It was not just a normal fever. It was like a heavy, dark cloud settling over me, draining every drop of energy I had left. It felt like a fire was slowly burning through my veins while my skin was covered in ice. By the time the night fell, the fever had taken over completely. I remember trying to stand up from the bed. I just wanted to go to the kitchen to get Henry a drink of water. It was such a simple, basic task, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. They would not listen to my brain. The room started to spin wildly. The colorful holiday lights outside the window became a terrifying, dizzying blur. I fell back onto the mattress, gasping for breath, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I could not sit up. I could not speak clearly. It got so bad, so quickly, that I had to be rushed to the hospital. The hospital during a major holiday is a very strange and lonely place. The waiting rooms are quiet, but the air is so heavy with worry and interruption. I remember the sharp smell of medicine and the bright, harsh lights of the emergency room shining down on my face. The nurses were moving quickly around me, asking questions I barely had the strength to answer. But honestly, the physical pain, the high temperature, and the terrible dizziness were not what was hurting me the most. My body was broken, yes, but my heart was in an absolute state of panic. As I lay there on that narrow hospital bed, feeling weaker than I have ever felt in my entire life, my mind was not on the IV needle they were putting into my arm. My mind was not on the doctor taking my temperature or prescribing medicine. My entire soul was screaming just one single name: Henry. Where is Henry? Who is holding Henry? Is he crying? Does he think I left him? I could see his little face so clearly in my mind. I could see his wide, innocent eyes looking around with confusion and fear. He is so young. He has already been through so many changes in his short life. He looks to me for his safety, his daily routine, his comfort. I am his entire world. And right then, his world was lying on a hospital bed, shivering, entirely helpless, unable to even lift a hand to stroke his soft hair and tell him everything would be okay. This is the heavy curse of being a mother who has had to carry the weight of the world alone for a long time. Even when your circumstances change, Your mind is still trapped in that lonely survival mode. You build high walls around you and your child. You tell yourself that as long as you are standing tall, as long as you are strong, your baby will be safe. You become the roof over his head and the solid ground beneath his feet. But what happens when the roof collapses? What happens when the ground gives way? I closed my eyes and let the tears fall, mixing with the cold sweat on my face. In that moment, I was not just a sick woman needing medical care. I was a terrified, failing mother standing at the edge of a dark cliff, realizing I had absolutely no strength left to hold my child safe. Lying in that hospital bed, the fever made my mind wander into very dark places. When your body is fighting an illness, your emotional defenses drop completely. The walls you have spent years building just crumble into dust. For a long time, my entire identity has been wrapped up in being strong. When you have been the only shield your child has against the world, strength is not a choice you make. It is a survival instinct. You learn to ignore your own needs so completely that you forget you even have them. You learn to sleep lightly, always listening for a cry in the dark. You learn to eat whatever is left over on his plate. You learn to swallow your own tears because you do not want to frighten him. I had convinced myself that I was invincible. I had to be. If I was not invincible, who would protect Henry? But as the IV fluid dripped slowly into my vein, all I could feel was how terribly fragile I actually was. I felt so human, and it terrified me. The doctors and nurses kept telling me to close my eyes and rest. They said my body needed sleep to fight off the infection. But how can a mother rest when her heart is completely outside of her body? I stared at the white ceiling of the hospital room, and my mind started racing with all the tiny, everyday details of Henry's life. It was not just the big fears. It was the small things that only a mother knows. Who will know exactly how to mix his warm milk before bed? Who will know which stuffed animal he needs to hold when he feels shy? Who will understand the little sounds he makes when he is tired but does not want to admit it? Who will know exactly how to fold his blanket so it covers his feet just right? These thoughts were spinning in my head like a storm. I felt a crushing wave of guilt washing over me. It was the Lunar New Year. I was supposed to be making memories with him. I was supposed to be taking his picture in front of the yellow apricot flowers. I was supposed to be his happy, healthy mother. Instead, I had ruined it. I felt like I was failing him in the most basic way possible. I could not even stay healthy enough to give him a proper holiday. This is the hidden tragedy of carrying old wounds. Even when you are physically exhausted, your mind tortures you with guilt. You blame yourself for things you cannot control. Getting sick is a normal human experience. But for a mother who has walked through the dark, getting sick feels like a personal failure. It feels like you are dropping the heavy world you have been carrying on your shoulders, and you are terrified it will crush your child. I remember turning my face into the hospital pillow, trying to hide the sound of my crying from the nurses outside. I was preparing myself for the old, familiar routine. I was gathering whatever tiny, broken pieces of energy I had left. I told myself I would just lie there for a few more hours, let the medicine bring my temperature down just enough so I could stand up. I planned to sign the release papers, call a taxi, and rush back to Henry. I decided I would just pretend I was fine. I would put on a warm sweater to hide my shaking. I would put on a smile to hide my exhaustion. I was ready to drag my broken body back home, because that is what I had always done. Whenever things got hard in the past, there was no one coming to save me. I had learned the hard way that if I did not pick myself up, no one else would do it for me. I was so trapped in my own history. I was still reacting to my life as if I was entirely alone in the world. I was bracing myself for the cold, hard reality of fighting this battle by myself, just me and my little boy against the storm. But I had forgotten something. In the blinding heat of the fever and the thick fog of my old fears, I had forgotten that my life had slowly, quietly changed. I had forgotten that the cold winter I used to live in had already passed. While I was lying there in the dark, punishing myself with guilt and terror, trying to find the strength to stand up alone. I did not know that the door to my hospital room was about to open. I did not know that I was about to learn a lesson that would completely break my heart open in the most beautiful way. I heard the quiet sound of the hospital door opening. I thought it was just another nurse coming to check my temperature. I did not even open my eyes at first. I was simply too exhausted to look, but then I felt a warm, familiar hand gently touch my forehead. It was not the cold, quick touch of a medical professional. It was Alex. He pulled a chair close to my narrow bed and sat down. He looked at me with so much worry in his eyes, but his voice was completely calm and steady. He told me to stop overthinking. He told me to just breathe. The very first words that pushed out of my dry mouth were about Henry. I did not ask about my own fever. I asked him, "Where is my baby? Is he crying? Is he looking for me? Please tell me he is safe." Alex just smiled very softly and held my hand a little tighter. He told me exactly what my panicked, racing heart desperately needed to hear. He said, "Henry is perfectly fine. He is at home with my family. My mother is reading him a story right now. He ate all his dinner, and he is not scared at all. We told him you are just resting, so you can play with him tomorrow." When I heard those words, it felt like a giant, suffocating weight was instantly lifted off my chest. I could physically feel the tight tension leaving my muscles. I closed my eyes again, and the tears that fell this time were not from terror or guilt. They were from a pure, overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in my life, I did not have to rush out of a hospital bed before I was ready. For the first time, when my body completely failed me, my child did not have to suffer for it. He was not waiting in a cold hospital hallway. He was safe, warm, and surrounded by people who cared about him. Alex stayed beside me through the long night. He watched the IV drops slowly fall. He wiped the cold sweat from my face. He did not complain once about missing the festive holiday celebrations. He just sat there in the quiet, dim light of the hospital room, guarding my sleep so I could finally let my guard down. I lay there watching him in the quiet hours of the morning, and a very strange feeling washed over me. It is a feeling that is actually quite hard for a woman like me to accept. When you are a mother who is used to carrying the sky on your own shoulders, receiving care feels unnatural. You are so used to being the giver. You are the one who stays up all night checking your child's temperature. You are the one who makes the warm soup. You are the one who carries the heavy bags. You slowly condition yourself to believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness. You convince yourself that if you lean on someone else, they will eventually step away, and you will fall even harder. So when someone actually shows up for you, when someone proves that they will stand in the storm with you and hold the umbrella over your head, your first instinct is to push them away. You want to say, "I am fine. I can do this myself. I do not need anyone." I wanted to tell Alex to go home and enjoy the new year. I wanted to pretend I was much stronger than I was, but my body simply would not let me lie anymore. And looking at his kind face, my heart finally realized that I did not need to lie. I thought about his family too. During a special time like the Lunar New Year, everyone wants things to be perfect and joyful. Being sick in the hospital is often seen as an inconvenience or a burden, but they did not see me as a burden at all. They opened their home and their arms to my son when I could not be there. They stepped in and became the family, the safe village that I never truly had before. For years, my emotional pattern was running away from vulnerability. I secretly thought that love was about proving my worth by doing everything perfectly. I thought if I was a perfect mother, a strong woman who never needed help, then I would be safe from getting hurt. Falling sick completely shattered that illusion of perfection. I was messy, exhausted, and entirely helpless. Yet, I was not abandoned. I was not left behind. I was being held. That night in the hospital, something inside me finally broke. But it was not my spirit. It was the heavy, cold armor I had been wearing for so many years. As I lay there watching Alex sleep in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his hand still resting near mine, the fever finally began to break. The terrible heat left my body, and along with it, the freezing terror that had gripped my heart completely melted away. For the very first time since I became a mother, I realized I had an answer to my darkest, most secret fear. What happens to my baby if I fall? The answer used to be a terrifying, echoing silence, but now, the answer was sitting right beside me. If I fall, someone will catch me, and more importantly, someone will catch him. I think many women, especially mothers who have walked through difficult pasts, confuse isolation with strength. We think that if we do everything ourselves, if we never ask for a single favor, we are protecting our children. We build a tiny, lonely fortress for just the two of us. But a fortress is still a prison, even if you build it out of love. I had been so afraid of letting anyone inside our little world. I was terrified they would leave, or they would disappoint us, or they would not love Henry the way I do. But looking at the reality of that night, I saw how wrong I was. My son did not need me to be an unbreakable superhero. He needed a village. He needed to know that the world is a kind place, and that love can come from more than just one tired, frightened woman. When the morning sun finally came through the hospital window, the doctor came in and told me my temperature had stabilized. I was weak. My body still felt heavy, but I was allowed to go home. I was allowed to go back to my life. Alex gently helped me out of the bed. He carried my small bag, held my arm as we walked down the quiet hallway, and opened the car door for me. It was the morning of the new year. The streets were quiet, bathed in the soft, golden light of early spring. Inside the car, it was warm and peaceful. I leaned my head against the window, watching the yellow flowers and red banners pass by, and for the first time in my adult life, I did not feel the crushing weight of the future on my chest. When we finally arrived at his family's home, I was incredibly nervous. My motherly instinct was screaming at me to rush inside, to find my baby, to check every inch of him to make sure he was really okay. I prepared myself to see a crying child. I expected him to run to me with tears in his eyes, traumatized by my sudden disappearance the night before. But as Alex opened the front door, the first thing I heard was not crying. It was laughter. It was a loud, joyful, completely carefree giggle coming from the living room. I walked in slowly, my legs still shaking a little bit from the illness. And there he was. Henry was sitting on the thick rug, surrounded by colorful New Year candy wrappers. Alex's mother was sitting right beside him, showing him how to fold a small paper toy. He was wearing his bright, festive clothes, and his face was glowing with absolute happiness. He was not traumatized. He was not abandoned. He was completely, beautifully safe. When he looked up and saw me, his eyes went wide, and he dropped the paper toy. He ran across the room on his little legs and threw his arms around my knees. "Mama," he shouted, burying his warm face into my clothes. I kneeled down on the floor, not caring if I looked tired or messy. I wrapped my arms around his small body, pulling him as close to my heart as I possibly could. I buried my face in his soft hair, breathing in the sweet, familiar smell of him. He felt so solid, so real, so perfectly fine. I looked up, and Alex's parents were watching us with such soft, understanding smiles. There was no pity in their eyes. There was no judgment about me getting sick and ruining the holiday plans. There was only warmth. There was only family. In that moment, holding my son in the middle of a home filled with so much quiet kindness, a profound realization washed over me. The universe had used this frightening fever to force my hands open. It forced me to drop the heavy burdens I had been carrying, and by forcing me to let go, it finally allowed me to receive the love that was standing right in front of me all along. I stayed on the floor for a long time, just holding my little boy, letting the warmth of that living room soak into my tired bones. I did not try to hide my tears from Alex or his parents. For the first time, I did not feel the need to wipe my face quickly and pretend I had everything perfectly under control. I simply let myself be a mother who had just been very frightened and who was now very, very relieved. Alex walked over and gently put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything grand or dramatic. He just asked if I was hungry, and his mother immediately stood up to bring me a bowl of warm, soft porridge she had kept waiting on the stove. It was such a simple, ordinary gesture. But to a woman who has spent years making the porridge for everyone else while her own bowl remained empty, it felt like the most profound kind of healing. I sat at their dining table, watching Henry go back to playing with his new paper toy. I watched Alex sit beside him, gently guiding his little hands, laughing when the toy fell over. I looked at the bright holiday decorations around the room, and the soft sunlight streaming through the windows. The fever was completely gone, but more importantly, the invisible fever in my soul, the burning, restless anxiety of having to survive alone had finally broken too. I realized that my greatest fear, the terrifying idea of falling down and failing my child, was actually the very thing that taught me the most beautiful lesson of my life. We spend so much energy trying not to fall. We grip the edge of the cliff until our fingers bleed. But maybe, just maybe, falling is the only way to find out who is standing at the bottom, waiting with open arms to catch you. I know there are so many of you watching this right now who are just like me. You are the strong one in your family. You are the mother who never sleeps deeply. You are the woman who never asks for help. You are the one who holds the heavy sky up for everyone else to walk safely underneath. You convince yourself that if you stop for even one single second, the entire world will collapse and the people you love will be hurt. I want to tell you something that took me a hospital bed and a broken heart to learn. It is okay to be tired. It is okay to put the heavy bags down for a moment. It is okay to be exactly who you are, which is human, fragile, and in need of rest. You do not have to be a superhero to be a good mother. You just have to be there. And you have to allow yourself to be loved. When you finally let your walls down, you might be surprised to find that the world is not as cold and dangerous as your past made you believe. There are people who want to help you carry the load. There are people who will love your children just as fiercely as you do. You just have to be brave enough to let them in. This Lunar New Year did not go exactly the way I planned. I did not get to wear my beautiful new dress on the first day. I did not get to take perfect photos in the flower markets, but what I received was so much more valuable than any perfect holiday memory. I received the gift of a village. I received the absolute certainty that my son and I are no longer walking alone in the dark. Thank you, my dear friends, for letting me share this vulnerable moment with you. If you have ever felt this way, if you are carrying a burden that feels too heavy for one person, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your words always bring me so much comfort. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and stay with me on this journey. I would love to hear where you are watching from and what this story made you feel. Thank you for being my safe place too. I will see you very soon.